if you want to be free, you have to understand that that comes with risk. The safest place in the world is a maximum security prison, locked down 23 hours a day, moved in shackles by yourself from your room to a concrete area where you can get some sunlight. That's the safest place in the world, but nobody wants to live there.
Hello, everyone, and welcome into CrushTheStreet.com. I'm Kenneth Amaduri. I'm joined today with Jason Stapleton. His website is jasonstapleton.com, host of the Jason Stapleton program. He's a currency trader, libertarian, and founder of Trade Empowered. And I look forward to getting to know a little bit more about those things during this call. But first of all, Jason, thanks for joining me today.
Yeah, thanks for having me. Appreciate it.
Well, you actually spent some time, I was looking through your biography, getting to know you a little bit, and you spent some time serving in the Marine Corps during the War on Terror. And if you wouldn't mind, just by way of introduction, tell us a little bit about your experience in this endeavor.
Well, I joined the Marine Corps in 1998 when I graduated from high school, and I got out in 2002. That was right after September 11th. And I did some other jobs until around some really terrible jobs until around 2005, late 2004, early 2005, when I went to work for a contracting company called Blackwater. And that was where I did the majority of my work overseas. I worked as a private security for a variety of different people, lots of diplomats, people who are working on reconstruction efforts. For example, one of the things that we would do is you'd have some guy from the government who was in charge of making sure that a road got built in northern Iraq. And so when he would go out, he'd have to inspect the road, or he'd have to drive down and talk with some of the local nationals who were doing the work. And he would need security as he moved back and forth doing that. And my job was to, along with several other people, was to help provide that security. So that's what I did. And I worked for about 5 years or so in Iraq and Afghanistan, doing various types of security work for different people. And then when I got done with that, I was currency trading while I was doing that. And when I got done with that, I started a career as a currency trader, which I parlayed into an education program that is now available online. So we kind of just one step after another.
Wow. Well, that's really awesome. I'd like to ask you a little more about your thoughts on what we've seen in the Middle East as a veteran, and what your opinion is of the way the U.S. handled itself, basically withdrawing, toppling dictators, and basically escalating ISIS to the level they are at today.
Yeah, I don't know if that's the way I'd read it or not. America has a problem because it's decided that it wants to be a nation builder, and it's really got no business doing that. We had a rationale for going into Afghanistan after the war to try and hunt down the people who had caused 9/11, or at least we thought we did at the time. And then we decided that we were going to go into Iraq as well because of weapons of mass destruction and whatever else. And what we ended up doing was we caused a really big mess that we now feel obligated to continue to be involved with. And at some point, you've got to draw down. If you don't draw down, you're going to be there forever. And one of the things that became painfully apparent to me in the early 2000s was that there was no way that the Iraqi army was going to be able to stand up on its own 2 feet, that it was relying heavily on the U.S. military in order to maintain itself. And eventually, when America did withdraw, it was going to collapse, either under the weight of political corruption or from people like ISIS and Al-Qaeda. And that's exactly what happened, is that America decided, okay, things are relatively stable. We've beaten back Al-Qaeda. Al-Qaeda has shifted now up into Syria. They formed themselves up in a new group called ISIS, and now they're waging war in another country. So we're gonna withdraw our troops out of Iraq. And then guess what happened? You got a huge vacuum there because the American presence is gone. The Iraqis fail to fill that gap. They fail to do their job and protect their own country. And down comes ISIS. And when that first happened, when you saw ISIS come back down out of Syria and back into northern Iraq, we heard stories about the Iraqi military just abandoning their equipment and their weaponry and just running away. And that, anybody who was there could have told you that was going to happen. And sure enough, it did. And now they've got a bigger mess there than we had prior to leaving. But it doesn't mean that leaving was a bad idea. Going back is probably a bad idea. Spending any more time and money and blood and coin from Americans is probably a bad idea. Because it destabilizes the region, it destabilizes the if you want to talk currencies, it destabilizes the global currency markets, and it causes what we've seen now in places like Syria is a mass migration of innocent people who've been caught up in a war that is destroying what were once vibrant cities like Damascus.
Right. Well, an ongoing term that we've been using here at the show a lot is breaking point, whether we're talking about the economy. And right now, I mean, what's going on there? It seems like we're just at a breaking point with whatever direction we go. And I'd like to get your thoughts on, with the way Trump wants to handle it. Now, he has said and has been quoted as not wanting to go into the war early on in the early days and was skeptical about it. But now he says, hey, we got to deal with it. And he wants to go in full force and attack ISIS full force. And he's used words like, we're going to go bomb the shit out of ISIS. And, basically saying we're not going to fight with our hands tied behind our back. And I'm just curious, what are your thoughts on the way the war was fought? And, basically what Trump wants to do is just kind of go take care of business and be done with it.
Well, the war was a rules of engagement nightmare. See, here's the thing: is that I don't like going to war. I think war is a bad thing.
I agree.
I think it's a dangerous and ugly business, and I think we should only engage in it when we absolutely have to, when our own liberty and freedom are directly being threatened. I believe in a defensive military, not an offensive military. And so, as I look at it, but when you have to fight, when you decide, okay, now is the time, and we need to go in, then you go in with your gloves off. The only thing is just to punish your enemy into submission, and to do it as quickly and as violently as you can. And you can't do that with the types of rules of engagement that the government was placing on U.S. military in places like Iraq and Afghanistan. And so, because of that, that was a hampering issue and really a safety issue for the people who were on the ground. But I don't think that's what cost the war or what caused the war to continue to perpetuate. I think that overall you had a very major problem with the entire way the war was executed. And let's set aside blame and say, all right, well, we're not going to blame anybody for making bad decisions in the past, but let's take a look at what we've done so far. Everything that we do has made the problem worse. We can see that radical Islam is a bigger deal now than it was back in 2001. We can see that the Middle East is less stable, not more stable than it was prior to us going into the Middle East, Afghanistan and Iraq. We can see that we're hurting more innocent people than we were before, that hundreds of thousands, if not millions of people are dead and certainly displaced. And what I've always said is look at the result of your actions. We always I'm a libertarian, and so I always claim and always talk about how progressives never look at the consequences or the result of their actions. They always want credit for their attempt. They always want credit for what they were trying to do. And Republicans, for some reason, feel like they ought to be getting credit for, and neoconservatives want to get credit for what they're trying to do in the Middle East. And I've just simply said, look at the result of your actions. You have not had the desired result. Things have not gone the way you wanted. So you need to try something radically different. If bombing the stuffing out of the Middle East, if this war of nation building and spreading of freedom and democracy hasn't worked in the Middle East, then maybe you ought to try something different. And I don't know what the right decision is. I can tell you what I would try. I would try pulling our military back into a defensive posture where we secure the United States of America and stop traveling all over the world fighting in Yemen and Syria and pushing for wars with North Korea and China and everybody else on the block. And instead put yourself in a position where you have a defensive military to protect liberty at home and then see what happens. Maybe it's worse. I don't know.
Oh, I like that idea.
Right now, I can tell you right now, going all over the world, fighting everybody everybody on Earth is not having the desired result of making the world a safer and more peaceful place to live.
Well, it's also economic destruction, considering how much we spend on the military and what our economy is facing at the moment.
Oh, it's a massive waste of money. War is a terrible waste of money. It destroys property and it destroys lives. It's absolutely a disaster on every scale.
I mean, aside from ethics and morals, is there any benefit to the U.S. being there and potentially seizing oil fields and securing trade and anything along these lines that could potentially benefit the U.S. economically, in your opinion?
Well, there are certainly benefits to America controlling all of the potential areas of interest that it has. And this is one of the things that you hear politicians talk a lot about. They talk about American interest. We've got to protect American interest overseas. And the problem with using that as the standard is that the American government will always find an interest where it wants to exercise force. Right, so it'll say, well, because lots of oil gets shipped through the Straits of Hormuz, and because we buy a lot of that oil, well, then we have a vested interest in making sure that that area is peaceful and stable. And so we need to be over there exerting our force by having our military in that area providing security. Well, the result of that is you don't have a more stable Middle East. What you have are groups of people and countries that despise us because we're constantly meddling and interfering in areas around the world. And you have a continued string of problems that occur because of that. So you're not creating the solution to the problem that you see exists. Mm-hmm. And so while there is certainly, I think, some benefit to having our military stretched all around the world in order to provide some sort of economic stability for us, I think ultimately it does more harm than good.
Net loss. Okay. And then let's talk about Trump and the way his actions have been, in your opinion. Is he agitating other countries and putting us in a situation where we might be entering an unwarranted war with countries beyond just the ones that we're already dealing with in the Middle East?
I don't know yet. I can't tell. I can't tell if he's playing a game of political chicken with countries like China and Mexico and North Korea, or whether he is legitimately trying to put us into another conflict. I can tell you we don't need one, but there are things that concern me. North Korea is a great concern to me. One of the things as libertarians is we believe in the non-aggression principle. We don't believe in initiating force against someone else, but we do believe in defending yourself if you're attacked. And the question is, when is that moment? Right. So naturally, if you're standing in a parking lot and the guy across from you comes up and he says, I'm gonna punch your face in, you don't have to wait for him to swing at you before you defend yourself. You know, the totality of circumstances comes into play. Is his Finch Cliss? Is he walking towards you at a high rate, at a quick pace? Is he bringing his arms up to bear? You know, at some point in there, it's okay for you to defend yourself.
Of course.
But where that point is always a tricky thing. And so when you look at this, if you apply that standard kind of to the nation or nations as a whole, North Korea most certainly has for many, many years claimed that it hates the United States. It wants to attack the United States. It now has nuclear weapons. It now has intercontinental ballistic missiles that it's trying to get off the ground. And it can now hit targets in Japan. We have bases in Okinawa and southern Japan. It could potentially hit Hawaii, maybe. And the question is, at what point do you say, okay, this guy has told me he's going to punch me in the face. He has all of the capabilities to do it, and he's moving towards me as though he intends to do it. At what point do I have the right to defend myself? I don't have to wait until the ICBMs are in the air on their way to me. And so while I think that this is a delicate situation, I don't know yet whether Trump is trying to put us into a war, whether he is just so ignorant of foreign policy that he doesn't really understand how to deal with it, or if he is running a masterful game of political chicken. And only time will tell what that is. But I'm not ready to certainly I don't like some of the things that he has said and done, but I'm not ready to pass judgment yet. I got to wait and see.
Sure. Well, we got some recent news about the health care bill that will potentially replace Obamacare. And it's already been described as Obamacare Light by Senator Rand Paul. And I've looked into it some. It seems better in some ways, but it still largely smells like socialist medicine to me, which I guess is the compromise. And I guess that's where the conversation lies. It's not free market versus some government. It's some government versus a ton of government. But I would just like to get your thoughts on this in regards to the economy and in general. What do you think?
Yeah, I think the Republican Congress is a bunch of spineless, cowardly sellouts. I think they lied to the American people or their constituents to get reelected. And I think now they have done exactly what I thought they would do, which is sell out. And I have read pieces of what's come out. I haven't actually got my hands on the bill to read it, and I don't know how many pages it is, or even if I would take on something like that. But I know enough about it to know that what they have done is they've removed many of the funding elements to Obamacare, but they have left in place most of the mandates, most of the regulation, and most of the stuff that costs a lot of money. So when you look at it, a lot of people are going to say, well, this is better for me because now I don't have to buy insurance, or now maybe the insurance company is going to be able to create a little better program, or I'm not going to have to buy maternity care if I don't want it, or something like that,
competition, right?
Yeah. And so, but they haven't increased the competition. They didn't do anything to help you buy insurance across state lines. None of the things that I think would really help drive down costs are in this bill. What they did manage to do was leave in place all of the things that cost a lot of money and remove many of the funding mechanisms, the direct taxation and the penalties that you incur when you don't buy the insurance. And so what it's going to mean at the end of the day is you're going to have a much more expensive program that's going to be funded through borrowing money. And that, of course, hurts your children and our grandchildren. It's an absolute disaster. I thought it was hard to make Obamacare worse, but I think that the Republicans have managed to do that. I think what we will get is a less stable market, a more expensive market, and ultimately something that is far worse than Obamacare was, and that's saying something.
Wow, that really is saying something. I didn't go that far to have that sort of reaction to it, but I definitely was shocked at how little there was in terms of change regarding the Obamacare.
Yeah, they changed almost nothing out of the bill. And like I said, what are the things that they did change? They made the insurance. The difference between old folk insurance and young people insurance can't be more than 5 times, right? Rather than 3 times.
Yeah.
They removed your requirement to buy insurance, but attached a penalty, so the insurance company ends up making out if you decide to go without insurance for more than about 60 days.
Yeah.
So the insurance company basically gets the right for a year to charge you a 30% premium if you decide to go without insurance, but they can't deny you for a pre-existing condition, which means the cost of your insurance is still going to climb. It's going to continue to skyrocket because the government has said to the insurance companies, you're no longer in the insurance business, you're in the subsidy business. Mm-hmm. You're in the business of subsidizing people who are already sick, and that's not insurance.
I was listening to
I was listening to a couple of clowns on the radio the other day talking about this, and some guy calls in and he said, well, you didn't expect to get diabetes. You didn't ask for your heart attack. And I wanted to say, yeah, that's why you buy insurance, is because you don't expect to have a heart attack. You're not planning on getting diabetes, but guess what? You got it. And that's why you have insurance.
Right.
If you didn't have insurance prior and you got sick, then what you got is a subsidy from the insurance company to pay for some of your health care. That's not insurance. And I hate the fact that we don't differentiate the two. If you want to have a subsidies for poor people, if you want to just give them money to make their health care free, that's one thing. But don't act like it's insurance, and don't act like it's the requirement of everybody else in society to pay for you because you got sick. Mm-hmm. That is not a role and responsibility of your neighbor. And for some reason, people think that mandatory charity is somehow generous, and it just isn't. It's theft.
Yeah, totally agree. Jason, I do know that this was the first phase release. I know there's supposed to be like a couple more phases, and we'll see what they do come up with, the Republicans. But so far, I'm very disappointed with what we've seen so far regarding this bill. Jason, I wanted to ask you a little bit about guns in America, the gun laws in America, and your thought about what the left's goal is in terms of people owning guns. And I know you probably have an opinion on this, considering you were in the military for many years, handled many guns. What are your thoughts in terms of gun laws and the direction we're going with gun ownership in America?
I think it's the difference between citizens and subjects. I think an armed society are citizens and an unarmed society are subjects. And the difference for me, I think there are some very good things that are happening in regards to gun ownership in America, and some bad things. A lot of states, Kansas and Missouri, now allow you to carry concealed without having a permit. So if you are eligible to purchase a weapon, you can carry that weapon on your body without having to go to the government to get a license to do so, and without spending $100 in fees and another $100 to go and get training to get certified to carry the gun. That just the right to bear arms is alive and well, and there are many other states that have opened concealed carry for its citizens as well.
So is there any good to that, though? I mean, the first time I shot a gun, and I'm pro guns in general, but is there any good to being trained and making sure people know what they're doing? Because obviously,
certainly, yes. Don't misunderstand me. I don't mean to say that you shouldn't. People ought to be walking around with guns that have no idea how to use them. I think that's a very bad idea. I remember we watched and I even talked about it on the show, some knucklehead who saw someone shoplifting and pulled out his gun and tried to make a citizen's arrest, and then started shooting at the vehicle as it fled the parking lot. That guy needs to go to jail because he took it upon himself to carry a weapon that he didn't know how to use, and he didn't understand the law. And so he put himself in a position where he broke a couple of laws. One of them is potentially attempted murder, because he wasn't authorized to use deadly force in that situation, and there's not a jury or a judge on earth that would have acquitted him on that. So I do think there's there's an importance to know the law and to be trained if you're going to carry a pistol. I mean, if we want to talk specifically, carrying a pistol is one step above a shovel. They're very hard to shoot. It takes a lot of training, and I've trained a lot of people, and including my wife and many of our friends, and all of them, when they get to the range, they realize how difficult it is to put accurate shots on target. And so, but what I mean is, the government hasn't stepped in and said, okay, in order for you to exercise a constitutional right, you have to go through all of this training. I think that is a bad thing. I don't think that the government should be in the business of qualifying your rights.
Yeah.
So you can carry a gun, but only if you can afford to pay the fine or the fee, and only if you can afford to go to the class and take off work to do it, and only if you can, and then if you can afford the pistol. So I don't think that the government should be putting artificial barriers to you exercising constitutional rights. But to answer your question about the left, I think that there are two different types of people on the left. There are those folks who just see gun violence, who have no real concept of the Second Amendment or what value an armed society brings to the table, and they just want to get rid of guns. It's an emotional reaction to what they see on television and what they hear all the other liberals and progressives talking about. Then you also have another group in society that what their real aim is control. And so what they want to do is they want to take guns out of the hands of citizens to ensure that only people working for the government have guns. Because when you talk about gun regulation or getting guns out of society, you're not really going to ever get guns out of a society, because you're going to have to take the police force or the military who have guns, and you're going to have them use those guns to take guns away from law-abiding citizens. And then the only people who have the guns are the government and the police. And if you think that the government and the police are terribly benevolent people who always do the right thing and who are in those jobs because they are because they're morally and intellectually superior to the rest of us, then you're free to live in that sort of fantasy. But we know that these are not inherently good people. They're no different than you and me. And it scares me, this idea that the only people in America who have guns are the government. I think that the reason our Second Amendment was there, Second Amendment was written into the Constitution, was not to protect your right to defend your home from a burglar or the right for you to hunt. It was in there to ensure that, if necessary, the people could rise up against the despotic government to defend themselves, that they did not have to stand on the sidelines with sticks and spears and defend themselves against men with rifles.
Right.
And that's why we have a Second Amendment. It is because we come from a lineage of people who are highly skeptical of government. And I think that that's something that I try and bring out every day on the show. Is, look, I love America. I love our country. I'm extremely skeptical of our government. Anyone who wants more power and control and authority over my life, I'm extremely skeptical of them. Anyone who says, "Hey, I want to take just a little bit more of your money. I'm going to confiscate a little bit more of your money, but don't worry, I'm going to give you back a bunch of benefits in return." I'm very skeptical of that, because I know a great deal of my liberty is tied to how much money I have and how free I am to use that cash. So these are all things that are deeply concerning to me, and the Second Amendment is just one of many.
Well, talking about the Second Amendment and the Constitution was written back in the day when citizens basically had the same type of weaponry than the government would have had. Now, the government continues to increase in their ability to fight. I mean, obviously, I don't think anyone would disagree that they're way beyond your citizen living in your urban cities here. And yet the government is still trying to put caps on what kind of guns and weapons citizens can have. I know in California, an AR-15, I just bought one, went and shot it. It was great, loved it, 30-round clip. Here in Texas, I know in California now they're calling it an assault rifle, and banning it in certain situations, making it very limited. And again, that goes against the founding principle of why citizens are allowed to have guns. And again, at what point should people be limited, if you think that should be even in the vocabulary for what type of weaponry regular people should have? I mean, if it was possible, should someone have a nuclear bomb in their house? I know that's really extreme, but
you can take an extreme. You can take an extreme, because that's always what everybody goes to is when you talk about. Because I tend to be very very liberal in the traditional sense when it comes to this type of stuff. So if my government has it, if other governments have it, do I care if Bill Gates has one? No, not really. I don't. It's not as great a concern. In fact, I'm less concerned about Bill Gates having a nuclear weapon because he can afford the multi-billion dollars to buy one, or I'm less concerned about my neighbor down the street owning a tank than I am my government owning one, because my neighbor down the street doesn't have the ability is not authorized to use force against me. The only one authorized to use force against me is the government, right? They're the only ones who have the ability to come to my house and haul me off to jail if I don't do what they want. And the goal of government, see, this is the problem, and people fail to understand what the real role and responsibility of government is. The role and responsibility of government is to protect life, liberty, and property. Their job is to make sure that the guy down the street, no matter what he's got, whether he's got a pistol or a knife or an Abrams tank, can't come to my house and compel me to give up my life, my liberty, or my property. That's their only job. Their job isn't providing health care to people. It's not ensuring that you have something to live on when you get into old age by forcing you to pay into Social Security. It's not building roads and bridges and making sure that there's infrastructure. Those aren't the roles and responsibilities of a government. And so when you ask, well, should anybody be allowed to have a nuclear weapon? Well, I suppose if you wanted to spend the $1 billion or whatever is the multi-billion dollars in order to acquire one and house one and ensure that you weren't leaking radiation into your neighbors, and but by all means, I think that is such a rare and I guess unrealistic chance that I'm not really concerned about it. What I am concerned about is my own government having a massive amount of ammunition and firepower and then directing that at me. Instead of using that to protect my life, my liberty, and my property, they use it to assault me and to accost me and to take my property and my life. That is much more concerning to me. And it ought to be to every other American, because that's where the real danger lies. You look at someplace like southern Chicago, right there. I mean, south side of Chicago, murder after murder after murder there, right? Why is that happening?
People have guns.
Because the police aren't doing their job.
Exactly. Okay.
Police don't. The police aren't out there actively stopping this from happening. They haven't doubled or tripled their force out there in order to curb the crime. They aren't putting the people away that need to be put away. And frankly, they've created such a negative perception of themselves in the black community over the years that the black community doesn't really want them around. So a great deal of what they're seeing in south side of Chicago is the result of the fact that black Americans living in South Chicago don't want to work with police to try and get rid of the crime. And so you have a criminal element that has risen up there, and nobody's taking care of it. That is if there is a role and responsibility for government, that's it. What did we see in Ferguson? What did we see in Baltimore? We watched the police stand by while they raided and burned businesses and homes. They destroyed private property. Why do we have a police force? What are we paying for?
Sure.
These are the things that government should be doing. This is the protections that they should be providing. And instead of that, we have stupid conversations about, and this isn't a reflection on you by any means, but we have stupid conversations about, well, are you just okay with anybody having a nuclear weapon? Well, no, I don't want everybody to have nuclear weapons, but certainly the most dangerous people on earth have them. So am I concerned if Richard Branson has one? No. Anyway,
sure.
that's
no. I agree with you, and I pose these questions to be able to have a conversation about it. And it's interesting because we always rely on the government to provide the solution in a sense. And safety, for one, is a real free market demand. That's a reality. Whether the government says that disabled or not disabled, I didn't mean to say that, but people with mental disabilities, probably shouldn't be walking around with guns, or a society, a city gets together and say, hey, maybe it's not a great idea if this person has a gun. There's probably going to be a free market solution that comes to the surface, whether it's the government or people coming together in general.
Well, there is a free market solution for that. I mean, people talk about that. Well, we need a law that says if you're mentally unfit that you can't own a gun. But when was the last time that you remember a shooting happening, one of these mass shootings happening by someone who was mentally ill who purchased their own weapons?
Some would say that the people that are doing it probably are mentally ill.
But so mentally ill that they wouldn't be able to pass a
Sure.
a screening. I just think that's, you could say, for example, that who was the kid who shot up the school, right? But he didn't have his own guns. He took the guns from his mom's home.
Right.
And so there are. I guess I just think that these things happen in a free society.
And the free market solution is people owning guns and being able to defend themselves.
Yes, and I think that if you take the guns away, what you get or what happens in Great Britain, where gun violence goes down significantly and knife violence goes up, and they start putting out knife amnesty boxes and with cute little slogans that say, turn in your knife, save a life. Right? It's the same thing that we do here for guns. It's just their knife violence is so significant there, and their gun violence so low because they don't have guns. And if you took the knives away, if you said no more cutlery, you'd have hammer problems. or club problems, because these people are going to find a way to injure folks. And the mass killings occur no matter where you are and no matter what weapon you're using. So this to me is really, in terms of the threat, I don't ever walk around being afraid that somebody's just going to open fire on me. But it's okay if they tried to do it, because I have my own gun and I'm better qualified to use it than that guy is.
Well, I love it. Jason, if I want to give you an opportunity here to share some final words, whether it's advice or just, what people should be thinking of in terms of mindset going forward in 2017, in your opinion, and also let people know a little bit about what you have to offer.
Sure. Well, thanks for having me on the show. And I know some of the things that I said are probably going to be, some people will find reprehensible and others will be excited about. This is what I would tell you, is that if you want to be free, you have to accept a reasonable amount of risk. And the problem with society today is that nobody wants any risk. There's this constant push to eliminate risk, whether it's risk of getting sick and not having insurance, and so we want somebody else to pay for it, or whether it's the risk of walking down the street in a free society and someone might start shooting. If you want to be free, you have to understand that comes with risk. The safest place in the world is a maximum security prison, locked down 23 hours a day, moved in shackles by yourself from your room to a concrete area where you can get some sunlight. That's the safest place in the world, but nobody wants to live there. Likewise, a total anarcho-society where people just run around and it's every man for himself seems unreasonable as well. Seems like people would want to have a reasonable amount of security. That's why nation states are formed. That's why we have the type of societies that we have today. But what we need to constantly understand is that those governments, those powers that be that lord over us, present a great and serious threat. And if we want to be successful as a society and we want to remain free, what we have to do is we have to constantly balance this desire for security with that liberty. And if you guys want to know more about it, I do a show 5 days a week called the Jason Stapleton Program. He already told you about it, jasonstapleton.com. You can come and listen, check it out. If you like it, great. If not, we can still be friends, and we'll agree to disagree in a polite and hopefully professional way.
What a powerful statement you mentioned there about ultimate security, and really a vivid picture of what that would look like. Jason, I really appreciate your time, and thanks again for coming on the show with me.
Thank you, sir. I appreciate your time.